Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this is the third time I've had the privilege of being asked to do a share on the Arizona meeting. And I've always got so much from it. I really have. I love the enthusiasm. I love the commitment. And it's a joy to see that in the very small country of Scotland that I'm based in, can talk to friends in the United States and around the world. I love technology. I'm hopeless at it, but I love it. Yeah, I'm Charlie. I'm a codependent. I know that I'm codependent because I know a codependent is now. I know the shape of codependency, and I have embraced that in my life. I understand how that has affected me and why I got into such an emotional turmoil, psychological confusion, and circumstantial difficulties within relationships. It makes sense to me now. But I had to come and be around people who had a program of recovery in order to make sense of the dilemma that I was in. Just a very quick background. I came to recovery almost 50 years ago now. It'll be a month or maybe 3 months, 4 months. When I first came to recovery, it was through another fellowship. There was no CODA or CA, NA, OA, GA. That didn't exist, I don't think, at that time. And I had to deal with my issues. So I was fortunate. I managed to. I say I got a sponsor. The truth is, a sponsor got me. He needed someone to practice his 12th step on. And lucky me, I was the one he invited to go for a coffee. And for the first time, I was introduced to the idea that the issues around my life, the difficulties that I had been putting down to basically what was a symptom, there was more to this. And I was introduced to the 12-step recovery program. I got down to causes and conditions. I recognized a lot about what I now know as codependency, but I didn't have the terminology. I didn't have a word for it. But I certainly knew the symptoms that I was suffering from went beyond the initial presenting problem. And the program over the years has opened up to me, and I see its application in so many areas of my life. And the transformation didn't happen overnight. And I think I had to come to terms with the reality that this was going to be an ongoing developmental experience. When I first came to CODA, it was a result of some kids that were coming out of a treatment centre who had been told about codependency along with their other chemical addictions. But no one really explained to them what codependency was. And there wasn't really, I think, a lot of people in Scotland at that point who knew what codependency was. With my involvement in another fellowship, a friend of mine was approached by youngsters who were saying, "What is codependency? We've been told that we're probably codependent, but we don't know what that is." Now, fortunately, one of my closest friends in recovery had been to CODA early on in his recovery journey from other issues. Unfortunately, there was only one group in Edinburgh, where I live in the east coast of Scotland, and it hadn't really taken off. It had survived for a while, but it started to go through some real difficulties. But he was able to explain to me what codependency was, and he had some literature, and he read it out, and I immediately completely identified. These are where my character defects and shortcomings lie, is within it. I understood very quickly that this went back to childhood, and I understood very quickly that because I already had the principles in my life, that I didn't have to go through that quagmire of what is this and what is that. I was able to embrace it very quickly. Thankfully, CODA has grown in Scotland, which is wonderful to see. Still a very small number of groups, but people are growing. So I'm grateful for that growth, and it touches obviously on all of the traditions that people have maintained. They've practiced their 12 steps, they've kept turning up, they've kept the meetings open, and on that basis I have been able to be involved for a number of years now. We're looking at tradition 7. I'm going to use the green workbook just to quickly read through. I love this book. I love this book. I love that it's concise, that it's reasonably short. It doesn't use words which are complicated, and it explains in detail, masterly detail really, what it is that I suffer from, how to recover from that, and how to become a part of this growing fellowship. I realized my spiritual awakening has been of the educational variety. It's been realizations and building a jigsaw and seeing the development. Eventually, I came to embrace the 12 traditions. It was all about the 12 steps first, and of course, rightly so, I had to deal with my own personal journey, my own recovery. But when I started to get involved in service, initially in another fellowship, I'm now involved in service in Coda too. What I realized was that this thing didn't just happen. There had to be a structure to it. And I was checking my facts earlier on in the 12 and 12. The copyright was presented in the US in 1952, and the first publication of the 12 and 12 was in 1953. I was born in 1951. I didn't know that these principles 20 odd years later would be waiting for me. And thank goodness that they learned from their experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, what I hear a lot of people these days calling the mothership. And the reason they had to put these together was it was chaos. The groups were growing around the United States. The big book was getting sent out around the world. New groups were popping up in different countries. There was no real cohesion. There were groups that became religious orientated, various religions. There were groups that had political affiliations. There were groups that were led by dynamic characters who had agendas, social agendas. There was all sorts of collisions going on all over the place. So wisely, one of the co-founders, Bill W., put on paper 12 principles which could not only bring all of the fellowships together, but explain why we come together and how we stay together. So I'll quickly read through this. It's only a page and a little bit. Every Coda group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. Tradition 7. Our 7th tradition is about Coda meetings and Coda service groups being fully self-supporting. One way a meeting or group supports itself is financially, which is crucial to the survival and growth of Coda. Another, and equally crucial way of being self-supporting is through our service work. Each of us depends on meetings to be there when we need one. The Coda Fellowship relies on continuously changing array of volunteers to do service work. What would happen if Coda if no one did any service? Coda would cease to exist. When Coda members join together to create a meeting or group, it is important that everyone is an equal participant with equal say, and that the responsibility for that group is shared by all. If one individual is doing too much, it takes away from the equal participation for others. Conversely, if an individual does too little, this burdens the rest of the group. Doing our individual part in service, as guided by our higher power, supports Tradition 7. Being of service is important to CODA and to our individual recovery. Not what we are doing in service. All service positions at all levels are equal. For example, serving as the literature person at your home meeting is just as important as being a CODA committee chair. As we acknowledge our individual responsibility to the CODA meeting or group, we also acknowledge that we are a group with responsibilities of being self-supporting. For instance, if there are not enough volunteers to produce a CODA community newsletter, we just stop publishing it. If no one volunteers to make coffee, there is no coffee. Groups are self-supporting in part when meetings, groups, pay for their meeting space. Meetings, groups, make donations to CODA's service structure, local, regional, national, and international. Members share experience, strength, and hope on a regular basis. Service positions are filled. Service positions are rotated. Self-supporting means that groups look within themselves for funding. Accepting outside contribution creates outside affiliation, as discussed in Tradition 6. A CODA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the CODA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary spiritual aim. Adherence to Tradition 7 protects CODA groups from outside influences or obligations. To illustrate the problem of a meeting not being fully self-supporting, consider the following. In a member's will, it was asked that money be given each year to CODA community group to help spread the word to the fellowship. As there are no guidelines for CODA on this kind of matter, the initial group conscience of the CODA community group decided that if it was in his will, it would be done. Questions of what to do with the money, spend it, save it, how much to pass it on, diverted the group from being fully self-supporting, as it had been before the bequest. In this example, we came to believe that the bequest had affected the responsibility of the group to be self-supporting. If we find ourselves attending a CODA group, this is struggling because of non-support, we may choose to do a group inventory as a tool to determine what solutions may be available. As part of that inventory process, we may ask ourselves in what way we contribute to CODA in terms of money, time, attention, enthusiasm, energy, trust, respect, compassion, support and sharing our experience, strength, and hope. Service can be the beginning of a journey out of isolation and an opportunity to practice healthy relationships as a group member. I love that reading. I think it really gets down to the nuts and bolts that this is not just about money, about finance. Bill W. in his initial writing of the 12 steps said basically that step 7 is where finance or money and spirituality come together. That can cause all sorts of issues and problems, but I think the reality is we get an opportunity as CODA members within the context of a group to be able to recognize that it goes beyond the pocketbook, the purse, whatever. It really does come down to what do we have to offer? What can we bring to the group? What can we share in order to keep the group sustained and able to carry its message of recovery to the still suffering codependent? An early experience of of recovery, as such as it was then, the fellowship I was in was reasonably strong for the numbers that were there, but there wasn't a great deal of emphasis on the 12-step recovery journey, and even less interest or emphasis on the 12 traditions. Over the years, I learned, and it was really important for me, that the 12 steps are my personal program, but the 12 traditions are where my personal program overlaps into the lives of other people. Am I committed to a service position in a group, as a group member? Am I able to take responsibility, to be connected to the carrying of the message in the way that we do that? I can't honestly, hand in heart, say that that was the case in my early couple of years. I was still so focused, as I can be today, on self and what's going on in my life, my problems, my difficulties. But over the years, I've recognized that in giving freely of what I have found, it has to be, for me, it has to be a dual expression. I do put into the pot for the sustaining of the group. But I was told early on, give what you can, don't give beyond your means, especially if your family might suffer. I was also said to me, don't give too much in order to look good or important. And again, it picks it up here. We have different personalities and different experiences we come to recovery. That's my observation over the years. But what I've understood is that really step 7 is an opportunity to perhaps humble myself if I think I'm too important, or raise my self-esteem if I don't think I have too much to offer. It gives me a sense of being right-sized. It allows me to be a fellows among my fellows. I've certainly seen all sorts of people, and I include myself in that, in various aspects of my development and my own personal journey and embracing these principles, where I felt I had nothing to offer. Of course, when you look at the 5 issues within codependency that are clearly stated, avoidance, denial, control, compliance, and low self-esteem. And low self-esteem was a huge one. I didn't think I had anything to offer, but at least I could put something in to the pot. There was other times when I thought I was doing really very well in my growth and looked down on my fellows, perhaps not being quite as important as I thought I was in the group. But I had to learn that this functions. It speaks about in here about the principle of rotation. There was one situation where I took on too much. I can very clearly see that now. I was holding various positions, hospitals and institutions, public information. Oh, there was all sorts involved in it. And I started to get really resentful that these other people weren't carrying their load. There was other times when I was scared to give myself to service because the low self-esteem kicked in. I thought, these people know more than I do. They understand things better than I do. But what I've learned is that the 12 steps are a great equalizer for that. As I've healed and I've grown and I've changed through my 12-step journey, it's impacted greatly on my understanding of the 12 traditions. And to recognize that what the CODA program offers me is a new way of seeing life, experiencing life, living life. But it also gives me an opportunity to integrate with people, many of whom I may not ever have met before, or came from different backgrounds from myself. That was incredible because I was born and raised in the East End of Glasgow, and it was really quite impoverished at that time. It was heavy industry. There was thick smoke all over the place from the chimneys of the foundries and the engineering works. And there wasn't a lot going around. And at meetings, this equality thing kicked in. I was going to meetings and getting to know people, and I was finding out I was sitting beside doctors and policemen and window washers and street cleaners and cooks and all sorts of people, all these dynamics, all these people I would never have had the opportunity to meet or interact with. And again, that gave me a sense of unity, that within the context of Tradition 7, these people were putting on meetings and they were sustaining the meetings and they were taking positions in order to keep the meeting growing and developing. There came a point when I was absolutely astounded that there were other aspects of service beyond the home group, what we called an intergroup, a local meeting, an amalgam of the local groups. I went along to that, and oh my goodness, didn't want to go back. It was full of politics. I thought, what's this about? I'd had enough of politics when I was younger. I thought, what on earth is this about? But I didn't understand that part of this healing process, whichever aspect of addiction or whatever an individual has in their life, and it was read out earlier there, many of us suffered from other addictions that we used to cover our codependency. I fit into that, that's for sure. One of the other aspects that really touched me was that CODA, when I got to it, confirmed what I already knew, that my codependency went way back to childhood. It started in well, how do you measure it? It says sometimes moderately, sometimes an extremely dysfunctional family system. Well, I don't know where to fit my life in there, but it was in there, that's for sure. So when I saw that there was wider aspects of service available, I was really quite astounded that people who had started at a group level saw the value for themselves and for others in being involved in keeping CODA together, but more importantly, in developing and growing CODA. I understood that there are those who are very willing and there are those who are very reluctant. And I can see myself in both those situations. I think through time, I've learned to balance that out. But I think one of the most important things is realizing that I can take these traditions beyond my fellowship. I can bring it into my personal life. I can practice the traditions within my family, in my community of friends, in my workplace, in all sorts of arenas. Am I offering myself to be a part of rather than apart from? Am I allowing myself to be in a situation whereby I'm willing to draw my ego back and recognize the value, the skills, the experience of other people? Am I willing to allow myself to learn from other people? Am I willing to, I don't use the word in a teach in an academic sense, because really for me it's the power of example that is the greatest teacher, the changes in other people. So I think it has been a big part of my journey to see that there are different dynamics in Tradition 7, and there are different opportunities and different arenas that I can bring this into. Today, I really like the idea of being part of the wallpaper, part of the scenery. I don't have any ambition to be anything other than what I am and what I can do today. That was growth. That was change. That fought against the low self-esteem that said you either had to be top of the heap or underneath it. I didn't realize there was gradients in this that would come through service, that would come through being a member of a group. I wonder sometimes how, in a sense, I was able to get that flash of light. And it really was the example of my old sponsor when I look back on it now. I seen him giving freely of what he had found, that the message could be carried in that other fellowship. I see it today with youngsters, especially the ones coming out of treatment centres. Whatever you think about that, it's none of my business, and I certainly don't make comment on it. But I see younger and younger people coming in, and they're full of enthusiasm for recovery, because at least they've got some kind of introduction to what recovery might mean for them and might produce for them. And I see them getting involved in service quite early on. And that's thrilling for me. That really gives me heart that Codependence Anonymous has a future, a day at a time. I can't control it, but I can certainly enjoy watching the fruits of the labour of other people. I'll finish on this one. Because I had this idea that the traditions were only for service entities, and it's great now. We have them at a local level, we have them obviously as individual groups, we have them at regional levels, we have them at national levels, there's national conferences, all sorts of service positions available. And people, hopefully as they garnish experience for themselves, and hopefully if they have right motivation, right intention, do have opportunities to do that. But it's just as important that I bring Tradition 7 and all of the traditions into my daily living. Our common welfare should come first. That doesn't just mean for me as being a CODA member or a member of another fellowship. It means as being a human being, our common welfare comes first. I do believe there is a power greater than myself, and that there is a plan, and the universe is unfolding as it should, and I'm glad I'm not in charge of the plan. I don't have to take responsibility for that, but I can embrace my part in it. And I see other people doing the same and moving out of that selfish, self-centered, self-consumed, self-driven place that codependency brings. Of course it does. A deeply rooted compulsive behavior. It dawned on me, just for myself, and again, it was an amalgam of realizations, that codependency and addiction, I don't put this on other people, you can forget all about it, but I recognized the way that it worked in me. It separated, then it isolated, then it decimated, and then it destroyed. The traditions are part of me reversing that process through connectedness, through being affiliated with my fellows, not engaging in outside enterprises. There's an old saying, which is, I think, probably began in Scotland. It certainly has that tone around it, where it says, whoever pays the piper calls the tune. I love the fact that we are autonomous. I love the fact that when we are capable and when we are ready, we can contribute at all sorts of levels to sustain and to develop the potential for this message to reach people like myself, who, had it not been initially coming to another fellowship and then finding CODA, I wouldn't have had a clue. And I would still have been lonely and isolated, trying to run a show that I didn't even understand, trying to protect myself. I feel safe and protected today because I have fellows around me, people who care. Even if they don't care about me, they might not like me, but they care about the carrying of the message. And they make sure each week when they turn up at their home group that the meeting can go ahead. And I love seeing new people coming in and they haven't a clue, and they're as bewildered as I was. What on earth is this recovery thing about? They speak a language from another planet. They talk about higher powers. Oh, that's crazy. Who are they? Where did they come from? But eventually, when I saw through their actions that they were actually living spiritual principles and offering it to strangers like me. So for me, Tradition 7 is, like all the other traditions, it's a keystone in holding a structure together that wouldn't be able to stay together if it wasn't for the traditions. I'm delighted to see so many people. I think there was 60 odds or 70 odds at the last couple of meetings I was at. Normally when it's announced that it's a tradition meetings, the number goes down. That's not unusual, but it's great to see so many people here. Thank you for allowing me the privilege to share. Thank you.